Let me first say how very deeply honored I am to be here today, to listen to questions and to answer questions, and hopefully create a situation where we're able jointly to keep our focus on some of the important issues of our nation. As soon as I got in here, I realized that this is Nigeria. It's Nigeria, no question. No question at all. You know, the first thing is that we must first disagree. Everybody has his own opinion on how the show should be run. Everybody has his own opinion. And even if you use glass, very transparent glass jars, you're still not transparent. So we have to keep moving, and this is the thing about us. I must say that I'm extremely proud of the Nigerian community here in Minnesota. I've heard a lot about what is going on here, and I've heard a lot about the very great strides that people here in particular are making. And so it's a very special honor for me to be here, and a very special privilege to talk to you today. I was hoping that we'll be able to take as many questions as possible, because I know there are so many questions. And if we take one by one and answer one by one, we'll never be able to finish. Meanwhile, I'm prepared, as I said, to answer every single question. But we need to take, as many of them as we can from a wide variety of people. And we're not that many. So I'm sure that we can achieve it if we do. But I'll take these first few questions. Hopefully we'll be able to take as many more so that people just ask, because there are so many concerns across, I'm sure, across the various topics and across the various subjects. Somebody asked, and that's the first question, why is it so difficult for our leaders to do things the right way? Electricity, education, etc. I think that first, let me say that there is nothing peculiar about Nigerian leadership. Nothing that is unusual, nothing that you and I are not already familiar with. The problem, of course, with us, and I want to say this and I'll repeat it and I'll come back when I'm going to talk again about some of what we have heard already. Somebody asked a question about killings of Muslims and Christians, etc. The problem with Nigeria is not an ethnic problem. It's not a religious problem at all. Trust me, I can tell you straight away, and having served in various capacities in Nigeria and public service, etc., I know that our problem has nothing to do with ethnicity. It has nothing to do with religion. Very frequently, what tends to happen to us is that the Nigerian elite, in promoting their own ideas, in promoting their own issues, want to make it seem as if that is the problem of the country. It's not the problem of the country. Every Nigerian, especially the man on the street, has the same problems. They want to be fed, they want their children to go to good schools, they want good education, good health care. The concerns are the same across the country. Whether you are Muslim, Christian, or whether you are from the South or Southwest, wherever you may be from, our concerns are the same. And let me say something more. I have been long enough, I've seen enough, and I have the privilege also of serving as acting president of Nigeria, where I have access to practically all information, all intelligence. One thing that is very clear to me is that when you see Nigerians coming together, and I'll give you an example. If you look at a charge sheet, that's a sheet where, if you look at a sheet where people have been accused of committing offenses, and you are looking at the charge sheet, you want to see who are those who have been, especially corruption, offenses related to corruption. You will see on that charge sheet that you will never find 3 Igbo men or women, or 3 Yoruba men or women, or 3 Hausa-speaking men or women. No, you'll find 1 Yoruba, 1 Igbo, 1 Hausa. You will never find, trust me, you will never find 3 Christians or 3 Muslims. You will find 1 Christian, 2 Muslims, 1 Christian, whatever. You will never find, it is never homogeneous. Everybody, all of these people agree when it comes to stealing the resources of the country. They have no problems with it. You will never find division. You will never find ethnic division in those things at all. People want to advance their own interests. People will come to you and say, I have been marginalized. I'm a Yoruba man, I've been marginalized. All he's saying is, appoint me. I'm the one who should be given the... That's all he's saying. That's all he's saying. I think that if we address our national problems in the way that we address them anywhere else, you who are here, there's no ethnic anything going on here. Every Nigerian is a Nigerian. And our problems are Nigerian problems. So for me, I think the main problem with the leadership is an elite that is selfish and wants to promote only its own interests. That's the main problem that we have. Our elite must understand that the problems of our country are the same for everyone, especially those who have nothing. The problems are exactly the same. Whether it's in the north, whether in the south, wherever, the problems of our country are exactly the same. And I've been around our country. I've seen what the needs of people are, what their real requirements are. When a bomb goes off in the market in Maiduguri, it doesn't ask, are you a Christian or Muslim? It doesn't. It kills. When there is hunger across the land, it doesn't ask which part of the country you're from. So our country needs, and this is the point, our elite need to understand that they cannot continue to carry on as if our problems have to do with some ethnic things. And we're going to talk about restructuring. I'll talk about that in a moment. But let's look at the whole question around the questions you've asked. How about education? Now, first of all, we must understand, and many of us know, that education is not a federal issue. Every state, especially primary and secondary, states manage their own education, the primary and secondary. Tertiary is also open. It's also, they say, it's concurrent. In other words, the federal government has a role, the state governments also have a role. So you have state universities, you have private universities. But with respect to primary education and secondary education, the states, of course, determine their own, they determine how. But there's a general policy level, which is where the federal government really operates. And this is setting the standards or setting the curriculum. Now, we're at a point in our country where, if you look around you, what you find is that at the primary level, we need to change the approach completely. In many states in the South, in particular, things are going relatively well. Not very well, but relatively well, compared to the North, where you have, first of all, a large number of children who are out of school. And I'm talking of the primary school, a large number who are out of school. Some people say, give figures in excess of about 10 million who are out of school. Of that number, over 2/3 are from the north of Nigeria. You also have a large number of females who are not in school at all. So the major problems that you find, and when you look at the statistics of education in Nigeria, you must desegregate them so as to better understand what exactly is going on. But even in the South, where more people are going to school, we need to reorganize the curriculum. And we held a summit about 4 months ago with all the state governors, looking at how to educate Nigeria, especially in the next 5 years. What do we need to do? Because we are going to have, in another 2 decades, we'll be the third most populous nation in the world. So our problems are going to multiply. So there's a need, first of all, to understand how to educate large numbers of people very, very quickly. How do we educate large numbers? Technology is going to play a role, which explains, if you look at the new curriculum that's been developed, a lot of it is technology-based, because we can no longer build classrooms as quickly as we require them. And we're talking even of the South. We're not even talking, if we talk about the South alone, we cannot even build enough classrooms to accommodate the numbers as time goes on. So we're going to depend a great deal on technology. We're going to depend a great deal on teaching using all manner of methods online. In particular, we're going to have to be using the sorts of, and if you look at some of what we're even doing at the moment, some of what we're experimenting with at the moment, there's a lot of teaching going on now using technology, using pure technology. For instance, we have employed about 500,000 young graduates. Each of them has a tablet very similar to my own iPad. Now, we employed all of them online because, of course, it's impossible to employ that many people or even engage that many people, seeing them, actually meeting them face to face. So what we've tried to do is that each of those who is employed has a tablet. On that tablet, we put a lot of material, a lot of training material. Many of them are engaged in teaching. The program is called the NPower program. Many of them are engaged in teaching. Some of them are engaged in healthcare, extension work, etc. So they use their tablets, first of all, to learn, to educate themselves. They also use the tablets to teach. We also have an open portal where they can go and basically learn a lot of stuff, take a lot of material. So basically, education in our country has to go that way. And that's why there's a lot of attention now on developing a curriculum that's able to deal with all of these issues. I'm not so sure those who are familiar, we cannot talk about the whole educational curriculum. I'm not so sure of those who are familiar with the new curriculum, which is called not STEM, but STEAM. That is science, technology, education, arts, and maths. The focus is on using technology to teach these subjects, to teach science, to teach technology, to teach engineering, and also to teach arts and mathematics. The focus will be on those subjects in particular. Now, why is that important? We believe that the major problem with the educational system is that it doesn't allow for critical thinking. Young people in particular, especially in the primary school level, it's cramming a lot of what we know. I mean, from the systems that we learn from, the old systems we learn from the United Kingdom, the focus is on cramming. The focus is on learning and regurgitating what you have learned. But that's not the way of the future. The way of the future is encouraging critical thinking, encouraging innovation, creativity, and collaboration. So the new curriculums that are being developed now focus on critical thinking, focus on collaboration, and focus on creativity and innovation. So that's where we're going. But one of the basic problems, and I've done quite a bit of work on reading and writing in particular. One of the basic problems that we have is that people need to learn basic literacy skills from beginning. There's a whole disconnect. There are educational systems in our states which allowed people to be promoted without passing exams, so people were just moved from one class to the other. So you'll find that there's a lot of illiteracy, if you like, which has developed over the years. So we need to deal with that. We need to deal with the questions of illiteracy. We started with basic literacy classes in some states, federal government supporting some of the states to do these basic literacy classes. And we need to continue to do that in order to strengthen the whole system. But you can't go back, you've got to keep moving while trying to fix the damage that had been done previously. So it's almost like, fixing the car while the engine is running. And that's what, our educational system requires. Someone asked about power. Now, let me explain very quickly that we've come a long way from where we were. Power, as you know, was first entirely government-owned. From 2005, a privatization process was done. In fact, lately in 2010, the privatization process was practically completed. So we have what we call GenCos. These are generating companies that are completely private. So they own power plants. They own the old NEPA power plants. And then we have transmission. Transmission is the only part of our electricity value chain that is still government-owned, transmission. Now, then we have distribution, which is also almost completely privately owned. Now, we've had, over time, what happened in that privatization exercise was that several people who bought the GenCos and who bought DISCOs ran into serious debt because they leveraged very heavily. Many of them borrowed money, and many of them, after buying the Gencos and buying the Discos, have run into debt and have found it extremely difficult to continue in business, as it were, especially to continue to invest. So that's one of the big problems that we have. But let me just give a quick example of that. So if you have a Genco, that's to say that you own a generating company, you're expected to buy gas, right? So you must have enough working capital to continue to buy gas. Now, when you buy the gas, you send when you generate the power, it goes through a transmission process. There's a wheeling charge. And then it gets to the distribution company. The distribution company is expected to go that last mile and ensure that the customers at the last mile pay for the power. What you tend to find is that if you are distributing, say, 10 megahertz of power, by the time it gets to the disco, there are technical losses. So let's say it's about 70%. When it gets to the last mile, question is, who is going to pay? Will the last mile pay? Generally, we've found that there are huge losses at that last mile. Several of the consumers are not paying. And of course, there's also the problem that aside from people who are not paying, there's also the problem that the distributors themselves are also not putting meters. So they're estimating bills and all that. These are some of the complications that we have in the value chain. So what have we done? We've decided that in order to ensure that despite privatization, the system runs, we have to resource the entire value chain. So government put aside a sum of 701 billion, which is what is called a payment assurance guarantee, to be sure that the generating companies will be able to buy gas, to be sure that whether the distributing companies are able to collect all of their money or not, the generating companies, which of course have to be paid, are still paid, so that the value chain is resourced despite the fact that the last mile, that is the consumer, is not necessarily paying in full. So there's a subsidy, if you like, in that value chain, just to ensure that we keep the value chain running. But that is a temporary solution. The permanent solution is that we need new investments across the value chain from generation all the way down to distribution so that this will work. If it's going to be private, then private people must pay for it. If government is still paying up to almost 700 billion just to keep it going, then there's a problem. And we can't continue to do that. So new money, we're looking at the whole privatization exercise so that we can bring in fresh investors, people who can bring in some resources in order to ensure that the entire value chain is properly resourced and it functions. In the interim, what are we doing? We are doing what is now called, we're focusing not on grid. What I've described now is what is called the on-grid capacity. That's to say, we have a national grid, and all that's been distributed in the national grid is what I've been talking about. But we're also doing a lot of off-grid work now. We're decentralizing completely so that we have solar power, we have renewable energy, which is not on the grid. So we now have a situation where you have willing buyer, willing seller arrangements, and we are decentralizing completely from the national grid. So we have a scheme, for example, called Energizing Economies, where we're simply putting solar power in markets and industrial clusters across the country. In the marketplaces, we're actually putting solar, and in some cases, we're using gas. We started with Araria Market in Aba, where we've put solar in that market. We have solar also in Sabongari Market, some of the big markets. We have in Ondo as well, several of the markets in Ondo. In Lagos as well, we're putting into some of these economic clusters. The point, of course, is that we cannot wait for our national grid to supply the entire nation. That's why we're decentralizing. We're also encouraging the states and private sector in the different states to provide power and to get paid for their power. That's what is called our eligible customer program. So we're trying to do as much as possible in terms of decentralizing power so that individual spaces can also have their own power while the national grid is ramping up to be able to produce more power. But since 2015, we've been able to produce, now we're doing about 7,000 megawatts of power. Of course, the actual installed capacity is about 13,000 megawatts of power. But power that's available for use is about 7,000 megawatts. But even the 7,000, because of transmission issues, we're only able to take somewhere in the range of about 5,000 megawatts. So there's a lot of work going on in transmission now so that we can take more power. You'll find, one of the great paradoxes of the Nigerian electricity system is that the discos actually refuse power. They actually say we can't take power, despite the shortages. And why is that the case? Because if you give the discos power, they must pay for it. If the last mile doesn't pay, it means that they have to pay anyway. So until we can get that whole value chain right, we're still going to have situations where, despite availability of generated power, it's still difficult to distribute. But I think that this quick solution is what we're doing, which is decentralization. We're using more solar now, and we think that as solar power becomes cheaper, it's going to become increasingly easier for us to be able to generate solar power. Sometimes people complain about the base load of solar power, but we think that we're solving that particular problem, and we're able to do far more now with solar power than ever before. I'll just go quickly to the question that Mr. I think it's Mr. Adekunle Shonuga asked about the healthcare sector. Again, the healthcare sector is one that, recognizing the way our system works, you have the states and the local governments involved in healthcare, spending their own money on healthcare. You also have the federal government spending money on healthcare. But the most important thing is to bear in mind is that because of the very nature of the structure of Nigeria, the total spend on healthcare is not just what federal government is spending. It is actually what the states are spending and the local governments are also spending on healthcare. Now, the basic thrust of our healthcare policy is primary healthcare. So we're using the primary healthcare institutions to deliver healthcare at the local level. Now, there is a sense, and many people will say to you, why don't we have standard hospitals? Standard hospitals in Nigeria, standard teaching hospitals and all of that. Now, of course, that there are some efforts, especially with the teaching hospitals. But the major problem is not with just creating standard hospitals, because the vast majority of our people live in the hinterland, and the vast majority of our people need primary health care. It is only by referrals and all of that you get to the teaching hospital. So the very first problem of a large population is getting health care to the last mile, to the man who is staying in some village somewhere, which is why primary health care is so important. The focus, again, is on trying to do national health insurance, because funding health care through budgeting has proved, of course, to be practically impossible, because you simply do not have the resources to fund healthcare through just budgeting. There's no way. The states cannot do enough. Federal government itself cannot do enough. So the national health insurance is a very basic part of this. And we're currently working now with the World Bank and with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to establish a proper national health insurance scheme. Now, we have a national health insurance scheme. It's done about 8 million people so far. But we need legislation to make it compulsory so that more people can get onto to the scheme, and so that more people can pay something in order to contribute to the health insurance. Because the funding of healthcare for the number of people that we have can simply not be done from just revenues. It's completely impossible. So the national health insurance is one of the very major ways by which we intend to resource education and to look at what to do. Of course, there's a lot of private effort as well. There's a lot of private effort, a lot of PPPs. I know that there are quite a few, especially coming from the US, so many Nigerians involved in PPPs. I know about two Nigerian companies, doctors, consortia of doctors, that are working currently with the government to establish very well-resourced private hospitals, and one that's a government hospital, public-private government hospital in Abuja, one in Lagos. I know that a lot of that private effort is coming, and government is encouraging it. There's a special fund that the CBN has been giving for resourcing those who are trying to do PPPs in the healthcare sector. And about 3 or 4 of those companies, some of them, as I said, involving American-trained, American doctors, American-based doctors, those are also being worked on currently. Philip Moses wanted to know about restructuring. Is one that if you ask anybody, everybody is likely to have a completely different notion of what it means. And typical of some of our conversations sometimes, we don't even define it clearly. So nobody is quite certain what we're talking about. Let me just explain something that, especially with federalism, that's been taking place over the years. I served for 8 years as Attorney General in Lagos State. As Attorney General in Lagos State, one of the chief issues that we preferred, and one of the chief issues that we fought for in Lagos State, was what is called fiscal federalism. Some people talk about that in terms of what the restructuring means. In other words, we felt that there was a need for the states to be stronger, a need for states to more or less determine their own fortunes. So, for example, we went to court to test the idea that every state should control to a certain extent its own resources, the so-called resource control debate. And we were in court on that matter at the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court eventually found that, yes, to a certain extent, states can control their resources. But the court found that, or the court ruled that most of those states, the oil-producing states, should continue to earn 13% derivation. In other words, if you're an oil-producing state, you cannot take all of your, resources. You will still pay. You will get an extra 13% after allocations have been made to you. That was how the Supreme Court decided the point. But many are still pressing. Many were still pressing for greater resource control, especially oil-producing states. While we were at the Supreme Court, only the oil-producing states and Lagos were interested in resource control. Everybody else was not interested in resource control for obvious reasons, right? Now that is the way the argument has always gone. That's the way the argument has always gone. Those who have resources want to take all of it. Those who do not have say, no, we have to share it. So that is the way the argument has gone, and it's gone back and forth. And when the Constitutional Conference was held, they were not able to resolve it. Some people took the position that, yes, there should be a certain measure of resource control and all of that. For example, look at Lagos State. Lagos State contributes the highest to VAT, to value-added tax. Lagos State contributes the highest to it. Of course, Lagos State gets a percentage of value-added tax as every other state, but Lagos State would rather have all of the value-added tax that it contributes, so that every other state can then take its own value-added tax. Of course, we went to court, we went to the Supreme Court, we argued over it. The court was not able to find in favor of Lagos State, was not able to find in favor of those states such as ours, where we have high value-added tax. So that's the end of that as far as the Supreme Court was concerned. And it's gone on. The debates have gone on in the National Assembly as well, as to whether a state should have control all of its own resources or should not control all of its own resources. If you look at Lagos State, for example, Lagos State earns more in terms of internally generated revenue than 31 states of Nigeria put together. 31 states put together. So you can understand why nobody is ever going to accept the argument. And so when people talk about restructuring, it's also important to understand the underlying facts and the underlying tensions. No matter what people say, no matter how they say it, it's still going to come down to, well, are we going to allow those who make most of it to take away all of what they make? Or should we share this resource? Again, some of the states, for example, Lagos State argued that we have ports, so we should get 13% derivation, as oil-producing states get 13% derivation. The court said no, said a port is not a natural resource, oil is a natural resource, etc. So we couldn't get 13%. Now, the issues of restructuring, of fiscal federalism, are not issues that are quickly resolved. People say, why don't you go to the Constitutional Conference on this restructuring issue? Some people say we should go back to the regions, to the old regions. But it's a waste of time. And let me tell you why it's a waste of time. Even the Constitutional Conference, when they couldn't find a solution, they then decided that we should create 36 more states. Oh, yes. If you read the Constitutional Conference report, 36 more states. We are arguing today that some states are not even viable, that it's difficult for states to make money. But because it is so difficult to resolve these issues, they say, okay, so create some more states. Now, if you create 36 more states, that's just a recipe, in my view, for just, confusion. But those are the kinds of questions that have arisen regarding restructuring and regarding the way that we want to structure our federation, the way our federation ought to be. I think the most important concern should be, how do we make the states economically viable? How does the economy make, because it's really, a lot of this is about the economy. It's about how people make a good living for themselves. I was speaking to a group of elders from the southwest of Nigeria who were saying that they wanted to see a region. They wanted to see the southwest region, the old western region. And I said to them, it's good. It's good to be nostalgic about the old western region because it was so successful. The old western region was successful. So under Obafemi Awolowo, we had free education, and we had the 26-story building, the first WNTV, the first in Africa, etc. But was it because of the structure? Of course it wasn't. Obafemi Awolowo had only agriculture and tax, capitation tax and agriculture. And because of his own creativity, ingenuity of the government of that period, they were able to garner the resources not only to build their own community, the Western region at the time, but also contributed 50% of their revenue to the federal government. That's how it worked for all of the different states, the Eastern region, the Northern, that's how it worked. So today, the question is not, and should not be, whether we should go back to the regions. The question is, why were the regions successful? The regions were successful because of the innovation, creativity, and selflessness of the leadership at that time. Today, it's a different issue. And today, the different states, the same states that constituted the Western region, and I take that just as an example, the states that constituted the Western region, the same states that constituted the Western region, are not making money from agriculture as they ought to be. They're not. They're not making any money from tax as they ought to be. They're not. The same states that constituted the Western region are not able to do the things that the Western region did in those days. So it is not a matter, and we must not allow ourselves to be drawn into the argument that it's about some geographical restructuring. No. It is about managing resources properly and providing for the people properly. That's what it's about. It's not about restructuring. I think we'll just talk about, so my view is that we must create the environment that allows for people to realize themselves economically, because that really is what the challenge is. I think it was Folusho who wanted to know what was the approach to improving the Nigerian economy, and whether Fashola was doing well with 3 portfolios or would be better off with 1. First, let me say very quickly about the Nigerian economy that we have an economic structure that is able to function effectively But the major problem of the Nigerian economy, or why we've had a slowdown in the Nigerian economy, is one thing, and it is corruption. That's a major issue. And I'll explain why that is so. I'll explain why that is so. Many people, when they talk about the Nigerian economy and talk about Nigeria, they speak as if they are in Minnesota or perhaps in Denmark, right? The truth of the matter is that unless we're able to deal with the fundamental questions, especially around corruption, it's going to be our economic circumstances will keep going, in a recursive way, one step forward, two steps backwards, because you cannot steal the resources that are meant to be invested either in the people or in the economy and expect that the economy will grow. So the first problem is one of corruption. And let me just very quickly speak to this. When we came into office in 2015, of course, you know that one of the principal issues that we talked about was dealing with corruption. Now, looking at the sheer enormity of corruption in Nigeria, and it's systemic. This is not corruption. It's not just some people taking a bribe somewhere. There's systemic corruption. All we've been able to deal with in the past 3 years, all we've been able to deal with is what is called grand corruption. That's all we've been able to do. And I'll explain. Grand corruption is where the leadership, simply by approving that money be taken out of the treasury, take money out of the central bank, or take money from the source and spend it and just share it. That is grand corruption, where the president can say, I want 100 billion naira in cash from the central bank, he gets it, $299 million in cash, and he gets it. That is grand corruption. And that is the kind of thing, and sometimes when you talk about corruption in Nigeria, the truth is stranger than fiction. That's the honest truth. It's stranger than fiction. It is the kind of thing that would cripple that would cripple any economy anywhere, because you simply don't have the resources. You simply don't have the resources for the graft and the greed of the numbers of people who want to steal the resources. As I said, all that we've been able to deal with is grand corruption. When we started the TSA is the Treasury Single Account. The whole point of the TSA was to aggregate all of the funds, the funds of the government that were in banks, in private banks. So we put all the resources together in the central bank so that we could at least see the movement of cash, movement of money. By doing so, we're able to save almost 60%, almost 50% of the corruption that was going on then, by simply putting the money into the TSA. Now, putting the money into the TSA is just making sure that you can see movement of money, but also stopping a situation where a person can simply sign off and take large sums of money out was the next thing. We haven't got to the point where we're dealing with contractual corruption. We're not even there. Where you're dealing with somebody taking a bribe, we're not even there. We're at this point, all we can say for sure is that the president is not going to sign off money and bring it out of the central bank and share it. That we can say for sure. Because, and this is the reason why, and I want us to just look at the slide on, I want us to take a quick look at the slide on earnings of the federal government. Who has the slide on earnings of the federal government? I think it's somewhere at the end. No, the one before this, just one before this. Now, this is oil earnings of the federal government of Nigeria, and this is from the OPEC report. If you look at the 1990 to 1998, that's what we earned. If you look at the Obasanjo years, we earned 401 billion. That's from 1999 to 2009. If you look at the last administration, that's 4 years, 391. This is up until 2017 December. The present administration, 94 billion to 2017 December. Now, in a 4-year period, if you look at the preceding 4-year period, you should be, the question that I ask is, okay, where is the infrastructure? Because if you earn 381.9 billion US dollars, infrastructure should be somewhere. Infrastructure should be available. But that infrastructure, well, we're at it. But one of the critical things that I think we must bear in mind, and one of the critical things that we must also see, is that this administration, despite earning 94 billion US dollars up until 2017, that is not, between January and June, I think it's about an additional 25 billion. I think that figure came out recently between January and June 2018. But we're spending more on infrastructure, we're spending more on capital than any previous government. So we're spending 1.5 trillion on capital. That is the highest that has been spent since 1990. That's the highest. Now let me just make the point, and I think it's important for us to reflect on this. Why is that possible? Why is it possible to do much more with so much less? Why is that possible? As I said, if you can control grand corruption, first of all, you can make sure that the resources go to the right places. The resources, it is not a lack of resources. It's not. It's a question of just complete mismanagement of the resources that exist. That's what it's about. And let me say something. The question, and this is a question that this is an issue that comes up time and time again, and it's a point I've kept making, that the issues, if you look at the way politicians and look at the way the leadership, Nigerian leadership, tends to approach the issue of financial resources, you will find that the way people talk about it is as if, well, this thing will always be there. There will always be enough. But we are beginning to see that there may not always be enough. So if the administration, if the people are not honest enough, if the leadership is not honest enough, nothing will ever get done. I always say, in fact, just yesterday I was saying to a group of friends that one thing that everybody knows about Buhari is that he will not steal the money. That's one thing everybody knows. And I said that if he sits down, if that man sits down, just sits down, does nothing, just sits down, does nothing, calls in the morning and says, Professor, how are you doing? All is well. If he does nothing, we'll save 60% of our resources. Why? Because he's not going to sign to take money out from the treasury and steal it. That's it. That is the simple fact of the matter. That's the simple fact of the matter. No matter how you choose to slice it, I've been long enough in this thing to see for myself that if you have a dishonest president, if you have dishonest, no matter where they are from, and please don't, it's not an ethnic issue at all. You will never find, look, some people made away with $3 billion from the so-called strategic alliance contracts, $3 billion in oil proceeds. They simply made away with it. A good mix of the people. You'll find, if you look at the names of the people, 2 Yoruba men, 1 woman from the South. That's how it is. You never find, trust me, it's not an ethnic issue. It's not at all an ethnic issue. Those who want to make it an ethnic issue, those who want to make it a religious issue, it's just a lie. It's not an ethnic issue. Those who, in Nigeria, those who want to steal the resources are on one side. Those who want to protect the resources are on the other side. That's how it works. And of that side, you will find people from every ethnicity. On the other side, you'll find people from every ethnicity. It has nothing to do with ethnic anything. All of that is just smokescreen. It's not true at all. So I think that one of the critical issues with improving our economy is, first of all, addressing the questions around corruption. The second thing is understanding the nature of our economy. The nature of our economy is one where we cannot afford what is traditionally called the trickle-down approach, which is where we're just working on industry and working on business and hoping that if we create enough industry and create enough business, people will be employed. That way, yes, people will be employed, but it will be too slow. because we have a large, very large population of extremely poor people, very large. So we must address the questions of the bottom of the pyramid at the same time as we are addressing the questions of industry and all of that to create jobs. And so one of the critical things that we're doing is looking at how to resource the bottom of the pyramid, how to give credit to the bottom of the pyramid so that they can earn, so that those people at the bottom of the pyramid can do their business, which is all usually informal trading. They can continue to do their business, they can do their work, and they can also make their own contributions. So with the what is called the trader money scheme or the market money, depending on which one it is, this is a credit scheme that is being given to almost 2 million traders, petty traders. We believe that by giving them money directly, and these are people who are already in some trade or the other, they're able to improve their inventory, and they're able to do more of their trade and get out of poverty, because the very first thing is to get people out of the desperate situation of poverty. And so we have to almost invert the process such that the very poorest, the lowest, also have resources, which is usually open to the others. And again, there are issues around ease of doing business. These are, I'm sure that there will be several issues around that. How to make it easier to do business in Nigeria, very complicated, very difficult, but we've been working on that. We have a whole, we have a whole raft of policies around ease of doing business. It's a gradual process. We've succeeded quite well. The World Bank recently, I'm sure some of you might have followed that. We moved up 24 places in the ease of doing business rankings, and were declared one of the top 10 best reforming economies in the world. Now, that is only in when you know where we're coming from. We're still scratching the surface. We're still far away from where we ought to be, because there's a lot that has to go into it. If you look at the port issues around, for example, we've got to be able to clear our port system. People must be able to import and export within hours, not weeks, not months. So we have to work on our port system, and one of the things we're doing is what is called the National Trading Platform, or the single window, which is what is used in other economies. Now, of course, in a system where you have systemic corruption, a lot of these things are resisted. But we're getting to the point where we're about to launch the National Trade Platform. What that means is that the whole system, the whole port community system, customs and everything is integrated into one and is electronic. So there's very little interaction or discretion, And we think that if this works as it has worked in other places, and a lot of it, of course, will be private sector driven, and because it's private sector driven, we expect that that it will move much more efficiently. If it works, we think it will be easy to solve a lot of the problems around the import and export trade. We're doing a lot of work in agriculture, and I'm sure that some of you may have followed what is happening in agriculture. We decided on picking certain areas where we will be self-sufficient. Take rice, for example. We decided that we'll be self-sufficient in rice production. In 2014, we were importing $5 million of rice every single day. Every day, $5 million of rice. We decided we're not going to import rice. We'll restrict importation of rice, and we'll produce rice. Now we're producing about 11 million metric tons of paddy rice, and we're milling. There's a lot of investment in milling as well. The Anchor Borrowers program was meant to encourage a lot of smallholder farmers, and we've seen that there's tremendous potential. We're now down to importing 2% of what we used to import in 2014, 2%. And we think that with the kinds of investment that's coming into agriculture now, and there's a tremendous amount of investment coming into agriculture, coming into rice, and if you look at...
Excellency, this is the time to clean Nigeria. One question, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay, we're just talking on the very important subject of agriculture and food. And I was making the point that we had to pick selected areas in agriculture, and really The economic thrust is to focus on the areas where we have a natural advantage. And agriculture is an area where we have a natural advantage. And if you look at the demands, across the world for what we can produce, it's just incredible what the opportunities are. If you look at the demand, for example, for cashew, there's a huge demand. Vietnam practically buys all of the cashew that we produce at the moment. Now, we're not even able to satisfy that market, let alone the Asian market generally. So there is an obvious need there. Even goat meat, what is called goat meat. You know, for many of the countries, the Arab countries, there's a huge demand which is completely unmet. So there's so many areas, whether it is sorghum, whether it is soybeans, you know. I mean, look at the opportunities that have been created by the arguments between the US and China now on soya products generally. I mean, there's a huge opportunity there for us. So the private sector in Nigeria is investing very heavily in agriculture. As a matter of fact, in the past 9 months or so, I've opened about 3 or 4 separate mills, you know, where people have invested significantly to ramp up especially the processing of agricultural products and all that. And that's an area where I think that we have an advantage, where we have a natural advantage, and where a lot, I think, is going to happen in the next few months and the next few years. There'll be a lot of activity in that particular sector. There's, of course, a lot of activity also in science and technology. A lot of young businesses are coming up in technology in particular. And you find that a lot of the technology businesses, especially some of the fintech companies in Nigeria, they are simply doing incredible work. And there is so much opportunity there. And there is a lot of funding also, and the government is assisting with funding, especially the Bank of Industry. There's a special fund that the Bank of Industry has put up as a 10 billion fund for startups and for technologies, emerging technology businesses and all that. And there are all sorts of other opportunities. In fact, if you look at a lot of the fintech companies in Nigeria, they are attracting both local and international funding, you know, and there's quite a bit of activity there as well. And one of the things we've done recently is to start up what is called an advisory group on creativity and technology. That advisory group is part of our whole industrial, we have an industrial group which looks at how the private sector works with the public sector to formulate policy. But we've created a subgroup for technology and creativity covering the whole area of entertainment and the arts, because that's another area of natural advantage for us. So this group, the advisory group, meets to develop policy in that area, in technology and creativity. And we went with that group I think it was last month, that we were in Silicon Valley, looking at all the opportunities and discussing the opportunities with many of the major technology companies there. One of the fallouts, or one of the results of that, not the fallout, was what Google decided to do eventually. So Google has now come into Nigeria, and they're now providing free public Wi-Fi in several public spaces. And part of what they've agreed to do, their so-called Google station, part of what they've agreed to do is to put the public Wi-Fi in markets, put the public Wi-Fi in airports and all of that. And that's something that we are looking forward to very quickly. So we think that, and of course, these guys, as you know, are not doing a favor. They recognize that there's tremendous opportunity. They recognize that this is the country is one where they're likely to make very considerable money. That's why they are there. And we think that the Nigerian market offers that advantage to everyone. Everybody looks at it and they simply salivate just to look at the opportunities. So what our role as government is to ensure that we're able to facilitate that space such that it is easier for people to come in and do business, easier for local people also to do their business. As I said, this is work that is ongoing. I chair what is called the Presidential Enabling Business Environment Council, which basically looks at how to make it easier to do business. As you can imagine, it's not exactly straightforward, but we're working on it day by day. I think the question as to whether Mr. Fashola should have one or two portfolios is one which I believe that if you look at infrastructure, I mean, there are ministers of infrastructure in other places of the world. And basically, what he is dealing with is infrastructure. And I think that he's able to do a good job of it. There are two other ministers of state. He has two ministers of state working with him. So essentially, there are three ministers anyway. So I don't think that the difficulty is in enormity of the task. It's not just one man. There are three of them. And then, of course, he has permanent secretaries. He has several people who are working with him. I think that he can do a good job. I don't think he needs further assistance. Now, I want to just go very quickly to the question about Christians, Muslims killing Christians, Fulani herdsmen, etc. I want to spend just a bit of time on that because this is, of course, as you know, a very vexed question. It's a very fundamental problem that we have in the country, and is a question that I think is important. That's not it. Please move on to the. It's a question that I think is important for us to understand. Just move on to where the herdsmen and farmer clashes. Okay. One of the questions, and of course, this is something that comes up very frequently. I think it's first important to understand what the fundamentals of this particular problem. What are the fundamentals of this problem? First thing I think we ought to bear in mind is that the herdsmen and farmer clashes are, first of all, clashes about resources, about land. Land being land for pasture, land and water. The basic problems of resources. The first and foremost is a problem about resources. This is why you have the problem in Benue, in Plateau, in Taraba, and you have the problems in Zamfara and Kebbi, where also you have these very frequent clashes with many people being killed, usually farmers being killed, usually. Of course, there have been clashes back and forth and all of that. But I think one of the most important questions to bear in mind is that it is a struggle over resources. In Zamfara state, for example, it's a largely Muslim state. So you don't hear the questions about Muslims killing Christians because practically everybody is a Muslim. But in Benue, where, as you know, the large Tiv community, a large Christian community, you are likely to hear that the herdsmen who are either Muslims, some of them are animists, some of them are not even Muslims. The Bororos, for example, are animists. You are likely to hear of a situation where herdsmen kill farmers. There are those who may want to describe that as a Muslim Christian thing. But I think we must always bear in mind, first and foremost, that this is about resources. And wherever it has shown itself, wherever it has manifested in clashes over land and over resources. Now, I want to take us very quickly just to understand this. Let us take Plateau State, for example. Plateau State is, let's take Benue. Let's take Benue, for example. Benue is a state where time and time again over the years, there have been a lot of movement of cattle coming from the north, coming from the deep north into the Benue Valley, because the Benue Valley is rich in pasture and water. And there's also a superstition around the Benue Valley that if you're able to bring your cows there, your cows will procreate faster, they will have more, you actually multiply the cows. So year in, year out, all through the years, you find that because of the grazing habits of the herdsmen, there will always be clashes with farmers in the Benue Valley area. And I'm not so sure whether you can see the timelines from 2011. From 2011, almost without fail, it recurs, almost without fail. And we're looking at just Benue there. To 2014, almost without fail, you find these clashes taking place. And the clashes continue year in, year out. Clashes essentially over resources. Most of these clashes take place in the same communities. These are usually border communities, the border between the deep north and the north central. They take place in the same communities. You find the Logo local government is one of those areas, the Goma local government. These are the areas where you find these frequent clashes, and this has been taking place, as I said, over a long period. Now, what has happened? What has changed is that recently, well, I think about a year ago, the Benue state government also passed a law, an anti-grazing law, saying, of course, that cattle should not graze in the state, but also saying that where they graze, they should have ranches, they should have places where they stay. In other words, they cannot graze across the state. They cannot use any grazing routes. Now, the problem, of course, that gave rise to a problem by itself. And now bear in mind that the anti-grazing law is very popular in Benue State. Very, very popular. Why is it popular? Because of these, as I said, traditional clashes that have taken place year after year, year after year. Now, the settler community, those who live in that place, are mainly farmers. So they are happy to have a situation where they don't see anybody grazing at all. But naturally, of course, you find that, of course, the herders, who also lay some claim to the land, want to be able to graze. So the question that has arisen there, and which has exacerbated the situation, of course, is the fact that now we have a law that actually bans grazing and, of course, creates some tension around that. As I said, it's a very popular law in Benue, passed by the House of Assembly, so it's a law. I mean, you can't, there's nothing to be taken away from the law. But that is that's the nature of the crisis. Now, the other thing I want us to also bear in mind about the crisis, about the herdsmen and farmer clashes there, is also the fact that it is seasonal. Now, if you look at the season we're in now, this is the rainy season. This is the season where there's lowest activity of that kind because there's pasture. There's, it's easy to find pasture all over the place. As we go towards the end of the year, where the dry season comes, the cattle, of course, are moving, looking for pasture everywhere, which creates a problem, which creates a problem and the tensions associated with that. Now, what is the solution? And we have to look at what the solutions are. The first solution is that first we must agree that we require cattle, we require farmlands. Most of all, we need to have peace. Because without peace, obviously, none of this works. How do you deal with this? How do you deal with that situation? Because it's a fight over resources, we must find a way of ensuring that commercial farming goes side by side with cattle herding. This country, for example, the United States of America, is a country that started with cowboys, people who were essentially herdsmen, going all over the country. They settled eventually for ranching. At a time, they were all over the place, but they had to settle for ranching. And so we have ranches here, all over the place. And I believe that that's the way to go. It's just that ranches must be private businesses. Ranches cannot be provided by governments. No government can provide ranches. They must be private. Now the way that goes is very simple. If you want to create a ranch, you simply pay for it. State governments, and one of the misconceptions is that the federal government of Nigeria wants to create ranches. The federal government has no land. state governments own land. As you know, a state governor has complete control and authority over the land in a state. He can only, if the federal government wants any land, it has to ask the state government for the land and pay for it and pay compensation. So there is no way, except for the territory of Abuja and some sparse places here and there, the federal government does not have any land of its own. So it is state policy. That is why Benue State, for example, says we're not grazing. It's state policy. They determine what happens in their state, and that's simply the way it goes. So there are states, for example, that are putting forward land for grazing because they believe that it can present an economic opportunity. There are private people who are investing in grazing. In fact, just today, I was speaking to a certain gentleman who is working on feedlots, as a business. And that's the way to go. The only way by which we can resolve this is to first of all understand it for what it is. It's easy for us to say, oh, it's a battle between Muslims and Christians. That's not the reality at all. It's not. That's why in Zamfara or Kebbi, where there are major killings going on, it is the same thing. Fulani herdsmen fighting the farmers in that place, but they are, but they speak the same language. They belong to the same religion, But I think our emphasis must always remain on looking for a solution to it. There are those who have said, for example, and I think that one of the critical reasons why there is some suspicion about the way things have gone is because the current president is a Fulani man. If he were not Fulani, it would be easier to say, oh, well, because don't forget that 2011, from 2001, several different, but nobody ever bothered. But where you have a Fulani man in office and Fulani herdsmen are killing people, it's very suspicious, isn't it? Oh, yes. That's the reason. No, that's the reason. That's clearly the reason. Without that, because nobody in the past, look at Jos, for example. Look at Plateau State. Plateau State from 2015 up until the last killings just this year, where over 200 people were killed. Plateau State had been completely peaceful. The last attacks was in 2014, where over 1,000 people were killed. From 2015 to the last one of 200 people killed, where there was, the killings in Riyom local government and back in Ladi local government. Plateau State actually celebrated almost 2 years of peace. In fact, the churches came together, everybody celebrated years of peace until that incident. So there is, in my view, a great opportunity for us to take economic advantage of the situation, and for us to be able to ensure that the herdsmen and the farmers are able to live side by side and do their businesses side by side. And I think that opportunity has presented itself, and we can certainly do a lot more. There are those who say all sorts, like, oh, there's an attempt to Islamize the country, And I want to say with respect that it's impossible, completely impossible. And I'll tell you that it is impossible because I do not even know how anyone can even try that. If you remember, I don't know how many of you remember, that in 2001, 12 states of Nigeria declared Sharia. 12 states. 12 states of Nigeria, 12 northern states declared Sharia. In other words, as you know, under our constitution, since 1979, our constitution allowed Sharia in the civil law. In other words, personal law between Muslims. So for inheritance, for marriage, etc., Sharia, the practice of Sharia amongst Muslims was allowed. But in 2001, what happened in 2001 is that 12 of our states actually declared Sharia, which meant that they were operating under the Sharia legal system, both criminal and civil. Contrary to the Nigerian Constitution in every way, completely contrary to the Nigerian Constitution. In fact, a gross violation of the Nigerian Constitution. But nothing happened, right? Because Well, I mean, at the time, nobody shouted Islamization. Why? Well, the president at least was a Christian, so he wasn't under any real suspicion. But can you imagine if that happened now? No, can you imagine if that happened now? If 12 states, even if one state declared Sharia now, I mean, obviously, it would be a completely different ballgame. The truth of the matter is that I think that we have within our system the capacity, even even currently within our legal system, the capacity to resist any such thing, even if that were planned or if that were a notion that anybody wanted to foist upon Nigeria, So I think I'll just leave it at that, and I'm sure if there are further questions, I'll be willing to answer them. Let me just take these questions. I'm leaving tonight. We're told that the airport will be closed. So we need to leave. We are taking off from the Air Force, the Air Force section of the airport. So we need to move fairly quickly. I'll take as many of these questions as possible. I think the first question was on Mr. Fatumbi wanted to know about doctors and the superiority between Johesu and doctors and all that. I think it's a long-running issue, but I don't think it's one that the government itself can do much about now. Because really, what is being said is that the medical doctors feel that within a medical establishment, they should have pride of place. Whereas Johesu, who are administrators, feel that they should have pride of place. I think that the very important thing to bear in mind is that administration, medical administration of hospitals and all of that, should be professionalized. When it's professionalized properly, it becomes easier to make a case for hospital administrators. In many parts of the world, including this, a doctor is not necessarily an administrator of a hospital. So it's a professional category that must be developed. We have not developed that professional category. And until we develop it as a professional category, we'll always have a situation where medical personnel, properly trained medical personnel, will always feel superior to the non-medical personnel. So I think it's an issue which is evolving. I cannot see an immediate solution to it. I think we need to professionalize first. You asked about healthcare. I think I already took the question about healthcare so that I can move on. Kayode wanted to know about money recovered from corruption, using it on infrastructure. Now let me say very quickly that every cent, every amount of money that is recovered on corruption goes towards funding of infrastructure even now. We have in our budget, if you look at the 2016 budget or 2017 budget, every one of our budgets, there's a line in our budget for recovered funds. And you can see there, it's very transparent, it's very open. It is what we use. We use the recovered funds. Wherever we find recovered funds, we use them immediately as a line on the budget. Most of our money is spent on infrastructure. So there are some people who say that it would be very good if we could take some of it and go and build a particular road somewhere and then name it just so that people will know that. But the way that budgeting works, obviously, that's more difficult. But one thing we can say for certain now is that some of the proceeds, especially the proceeds of the so-called Abacha loot, for example, the 320 million Abacha loot, now that is it's now being used for the social investment program directly and is supervised by the World Bank. So the World Bank and ourselves are working, using it for the first part of our social safety net. This is what we're using for both conditional cash transfers, some for the homegrown school feeding, and some for JEEP, which is our microcredit scheme. I think that, the proceeds of corruption of course, it's good for people to see where it's been spent, but I think that the best way is what we're doing, which is making it clear as a line so that it can be accounted for properly in the budget. So it's not a special fund somewhere, that is just being used in any way. We use it as a single line in the budget. And we believe that it is the right way to go. As I said, some of it, of course, most of it goes on infrastructure, which is our major spend. The Tofumi Akintade wanted to know what is being done to encourage young Nigerians to come home. I think that what is important for us as a government and as a people is that we must always ensure that we create the right environment for everyone. And that's really what we're doing. And I just talked about technology. I talked about, how very many young people in Nigeria are in technology. And many of them are home. They're coming home. You should be home. You should be back home, working in whatever field you want to work. I have two daughters. They both two of them, one of them graduated here in the US, another graduated in the UK. But they're both home and they're working. None of them is employed by government. They're working for themselves, creating their own opportunities. One of them makes clothes and sells clothes online. Another one makes beauty products using shea butter. There's a lot of opportunity back home. There's no reason at all why you should be here. You should be really back home. No reason whatsoever. It's true, you should be back home. It's a lot of opportunity. No, truly. Chidi, I think it was Chidi who wanted to know what the pain points are, and in the healthcare system, we've talked about that, but I'll just address very quickly the questions on geographical access to healthcare. Now, what we're doing, a lot of work that's going on, especially with respect to the primary healthcare, and I'll take the question that was asked by Felicia as well. I think it's Felicia who asked the question about TBAs and all that, is that first, it is the nurses that are the mainstay of the primary healthcare system. The nurses, they're the ones who are employed. They're the ones who do most of the work. We simply have to rely on them. And then we also have the traditional birth attendants. And, the traditional birth attendants are people who, the traditional midwives, but they are trained. They're now being trained, given, equipped and helped be more, productive, more hygienic and all that. They constitute a large proportion of the workforce at the primary healthcare level. We have a lot of difficulty with training of medical personnel and being able to, have the number of medical personnel that we require. And that is across the country, but more pronounced in the northern part, of the country. But this is something that a great deal of time and attention is being spent on. I know that several states, because again, as you know, healthcare is also a state issue. Several states are working on it. Some are not as good or are not working as hard as others, but some are really doing a lot of work in that area. I know that quite a bit of work is being done. Akwa Ibom, for example, I know is doing a lot. Anambra is doing quite a bit of work. I know that Zamfara State recently, started doing a lot of work in medical care as well, especially training of nurses and also hiring of doctors from everywhere. So it's you see, the thing with, I think, medical with medical personnel generally is that you will almost always find that they will be in very high demand, because the health needs of a country our size is just tremendous. Question, of course, is how well remunerated they are, because really, money is bound to follow, talent is bound to follow the money, so it's a bit difficult, where you are trying to, except of course if what we're trying to do at the moment, help with what we call the Empower. We have the N Health, where we're encouraging young graduates to come into healthcare under our Empower program. This is a program for graduates of any specialty or any field, and we're training them to be to deliver healthcare at the primary level. This is the part of the Empower program, what is called N Health. So there's almost a desperation to produce the number of health, but we're well behind. We're well behind where we should be with respect to that. Okay, so I think I'll just leave that at that point. Many Nigerians do not, I think the question around states paying their staff and all of that, I think that we definitely have a situation where many of the states, when we got into office in 2015, 24 states were owing at least 6 months of salaries. And so we had to do a series of bailouts, about 3 bailouts, to ensure that the states were able to pay salaries. And we still find that there are states today that are still behind in salary payments. There are several states that are still behind in salary payments. Now, as you know, I mean, we cannot control state finances. You know, as a matter of fact, when in 2004, President Obasanjo seized Lagos state funds because we had created new local governments and we wanted to use our money, our local government money in the several local governments. We went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said that the federal government, the president, had no authority to seize state funds or to control state funds in any way, which really is what it is in the federation. So there's very little that can be done except to put pressure on them. When we give funds, when we lend money to the states, we try and control what they do with it. But it's only where you lend money to the states. When they get their allocations, it's very difficult for anyone to control what exactly they do with those allocations. But I believe that the political process itself, you know, enables, I mean, if you look at the states where they have not been paying salaries, usually you find that it's very difficult to get reelected if you don't pay salaries in your state. And we've seen 1 or 2 examples of situations where the people have, of course, revolted, where especially in many of our states that are almost entirely civil service states, where the payment of salaries is very crucial. So I think that's probably the only check that we can find to that. The question, someone said, the fathers in the Lord, talking about part of a clique to Islamize. I think we've talked about Islamization. The important thing, I think, to bear in mind always is that in a multi-religious society, in a multi-ethnic society, freedom of worship is crucial. The business of government is not to get involved in religion. Government must not involve itself in religion. The moment government begins to involve itself in religion, you then start getting all the confusing notions. That's one of the reasons why under this administration, the president declared from day one that the federal government will not sponsor pilgrimages, whether they are pilgrimages to Mecca or to Jerusalem. And so we've kept out as much as possible from religion. Questions around Islamization and all that, you know, you find that a lot of church leaders, not necessarily a lot, but, you know, a few church leaders, you know, see questions around Christianity and Islam as points that they believe might even enhance their own popularity. I think it's a very dangerous trend, very dangerous. We must not promote religious division. We must be careful. There is no society that has survived religious crisis, religious wars. None. Everywhere you look, it's endless because it's a completely emotive matter, completely emotive. If somebody says, I mean, look at the commission that Christ has given us as Christians, those of us who are Christians. It's a commission to go out there and preach the word to everybody, whoever they may be, whether they are Muslims, Christians, whoever, preach the word to them and teach them that the love of Jesus Christ is what saves, that the love of Jesus Christ is sufficient for them. That's really what we're supposed to do. But when we begin to create us versus them, when we begin to create situations where we see the other side as enemies, how can we genuinely preach the love of Jesus Christ to them? I think that we must be responsible about, especially those of us who are Christians. I'm a pastor, I'm a born-again Christian. I think that my responsibility first and foremost is to demonstrate by my own behavior, to demonstrate that it is possible to be a good person, it's possible to do the right things, and still and be a Christian. That way you can attract others. But if you specialize in demonizing persons of other religions or other faiths, first, you cannot even win the argument. You can never win the argument because everyone believes, even those who do not believe in God, believe that they're absolutely right. So I think that one should ignore all of those who want to make heavy weather of religion. I think that we should be careful to avoid creating division on account of religion. How are we preserving our culture? I think that we could do much more. We could do a lot more. I think the lady has left already, Abimbola. Oh, she's still here. Okay, right, you're behind there. Okay. I think we could do a lot more in terms of preserving our culture and getting our people to be serious about culture. There are those who criticize us for not even having a good museum, you know, and we're trying to establish a museum now in Abuja. There's a National Museum in Lagos, which is more or less gone. I think we need to do a museum and do. In fact, there is a lady who works with me, Novo. Where is Novo? Who is doing some very, oh, there she is, who is doing some very great work now on Nigerian culture. She's trying to do something on October 1st, do a creative thing on the history of Nigeria and all of that and culture. So I think there's a lot that can be done, but the reason, my view, why we haven't been able to sustain even what we did in the past is because we haven't really interested the private sector in it, because the private sector in other parts of the world, I mean, you give a grant, government gives a grant, but once the private sector sees that there is money in it, they get into it and it can be sustained, which is why we have in entertainment, for example, we have a lot of interest, a great deal of interest in Nigerian film, Nigerian, dress, weddings, etc., because the private sector is involved in it. I think the moment we open it up and it's obvious that money can be made from it, it will be much easier to preserve our culture. Most Ayodele John Awole said most of our best brains go outside the country. What are you doing about brain drain? Let me say immediately that money, talent will always follow money. There's no question about that. But if talent is better remunerated somewhere else, it will go. It's not a Nigerian phenomenon. If you look around you, you find Indians, you find Asians in this country. Everybody who comes to America, for example, is in search of better opportunities. You are never going to be able to hold down people unless you create better opportunities, unless people see that there is an advantage where they are. And this is really the point around everything that we're trying to do, around creating an environment where Nigerians can do good business in Nigeria, do well, be successful in Nigeria. And that really, so the whole effort around creating an environment that's good for business, around creating an economy that is sound, is so as to be able to retain our own people. But there is no special route except to create the circumstances. And this is really what we're doing. Apapa infrastructure. I didn't say that the trailers should disappear from Apapa in 24 hours. No, the trailers cannot leave, would not leave Apapa anyway, because a lot of these trailers are container trailers. What happened in Apapa was that there was a gridlock. It was impossible for movement because, and there's so many reasons why that gridlock developed around Apapa. The first is that the port in Apapa, and I'm sure, and I think someone has mentioned, the port in Apapa is congested. This is a 35 million metric ton port that is now doing 85 million metric tons. So there's no way that it will not be congested. Now, part of the problem is that Apapa was developed as a port from where there was a rail route. So rail will take out the goods from Apapa, but the rail route was never used, never developed. So now, what we're doing now is starting the Lagos-Kano narrow gauge rail from the Apapa port, because that's one of the fastest ways and most effective ways of taking cargo out. A lot of the cargo that is taken out of Apapa today, because of the 30-ton trucks and some of the huge trucks, destroys the roads. And so because the roads are destroyed, obviously it makes it more difficult for the trucks to move smoothly out of the place. And many of the trucks have to come back. So they take the containers out and they return the containers and take a deposit. So the process of going around, especially on the terrible roads in that locality, is what created the gridlock. So the first order of business was to ensure that that gridlock was reduced, which is what the instructions I gave, and we're able to reduce the gridlock. But what we're doing now, I'm sure that if you're following, you'll notice that just 4 weeks ago, about 3 weeks ago now, we gave out the contract for the main route out of Apapa all the way up to Mile 2. Then the route around Liverpool, the route around the port itself, is being done now under a tax credit scheme by Dangote and Flour Mills. So they are sorting out that road and they'll get a tax credit for doing so. That's one of the innovations around creating the environment. So we think that we'll be able to resolve the problem around Apapa, but obviously the road network there needs to be dealt with. But to the point that was made about using the other ports, especially the ports in the South-South, it's an important point that's been made repeatedly. If you listen, I'm not so sure how closely you followed this, but the Minister of Transport was talking about the Warri port, the opening of the Warri port, and also Port Harcourt. Now, the problem really is that Lagos takes most of the traffic because that is where most of the business is. That's just the reality. See, ideally, when we open up those other port areas, and of course we are doing so, and also Calabar, we'll be able to decongest, but not as much as we would wish, because people are still going to want to come back. Lagos is 63% of commercial activity. That really is substantial. And so what we really need to do is to ensure that that whole port area, that we're able to improve the facilities of the ports, improve the turnaround time for cargo that's coming in and that's going out, improve that turnaround time, which is part of what we're working on with the NTP, with the National Trade Platform, etc. Because if we're not able to do so, we're always going to have a situation where the ports will be too small for the cargo that is handling. So we need to improve that structure. We also need to improve transportation out of the ports, which is the rail route that we're talking about. And of course, the dry ports. There are also dry ports that are opening up, so that it's possible for us to be able to get to move cargo to certain points from where they can then be taken out, especially by rail. From there, where they can then be taken out to the hinterland and to various other areas. Rail is going to be very important in whatever it is that we do. And that's why the new Lagos-Kano rail, which we've started, is going all the way up to Ibadan. We should be all the way up to Ibadan by the end of November. We should be as far as Ibadan. Now, when we're able to go up that as far as Ibadan, we'll be able to move a lot of cargo out of Apapa and a lot of cargo generally. Once you're able to get out of the whole Lagos area, it becomes easier, of course, to distribute across the country. That's for and then the population census. Yes, agreed. We ought to be able to count ourselves. That's a very basic issue. But I think that things are a lot easier now. Technology has made things a lot easier. As a matter of fact, you will find that aside from a physical count, there are also all sorts of other methods. One of the things we've asked to be done now is that we're asking for unifying all of the different platforms that we have at the moment, the different biodata platforms that we have. So we're trying to unify all of them. But the next census should have taken place in 2017. So we're looking possibly at doing a census in 2019. But I think with the technology that's available today, it will be a lot easier to be able to do a much more accurate count than ever before, simply because the technology has made it so much simpler. Today we have almost 80 million, biometric data already. So there is already quite a bit of data, and there's already quite a bit of information on each individual, and people can be identified by single identification, by unique identity. So I think it's a lot easier, and I don't think that we are going to have a great deal of difficulty in doing that. Alaji Anderson, why is it taking so long to remove Daura and all of that, and self-learning? Well, I'm not so sure that the question really is how long it takes to remove. I'm not so sure what his previous crimes were, but I think that when something went wrong, when it was demonstrated that something went wrong, I think we took the appropriate action at that time. And I believe that that's the right thing to do. And soft landing, if you join the APC, I'm not entirely certain that the mere fact that the person joins the APC means that they'll get a soft landing. For example, the only 2 governors that have been convicted so far and sent to jail are APC members, right? The 2 of them are APC members. To date, no PDP governor has yet been sent to jail. So I think that coming to hide in the APC may not be the smartest move, going by what we have seen, but in any event, the most important thing, and I want to just take that question along with the whole question of prosecution, one of the problems we have is that we have a system of justice that is extremely slow. Unfortunately, that is so because of the constitutional arrangement that we have. So our constitution allows you to appeal as of right on a wide variety of issues. So it then becomes possible, for example, if I'm being tried today, let's say that a person is taken before a high court for trial. He can first argue that the charges should be quashed. In other words, that he should not have been charged in the first place. And then he can take that argument all the way to the Supreme Court. So that, of course, means several years. I was prosecutor in Lagos, as I said, for about 8 years as Attorney General. I appeared in several cases myself and several, of the criminal trials myself. And as Attorney General appearing, I have priority. In other words, my case must be heard first. Despite the priority, it still took 7 years to get a particular case, a fairly large a major criminal case, the Abacha killings and all of that. It took years to be able to get to the point where we're even nearly able to conclude the trial. I actually left as Attorney General without being able to conclude the trial, some parts of the trial. So it's a very slow system, and it's one of the things that we need to do by way of a constitutional amendment, because it takes forever. Look at the 2 governors that I was talking about who have been prosecuted to conviction. Their cases are at least 8 years old. Each of them is at least 8 years old. So it takes a while. It's far too slow. And in a system such as ours, the tendency is to think that nothing is being done. I think our case is the proverbial long arm of the law. One day it will eventually get to you. But really, we need to do something about that system. It involves actually reforming the law by way of a constitutional amendment. We have a couple of proposals, after the Criminal Justice Act. We have a couple of proposals now to amend such that it is difficult to slow down the process. The other thing is discipline within the legal practitioners, the laws, the NBA, the Nigerian Bar Association. Many lawyers, almost as a matter of habit, will delay cases for as long as possible. For example, there are some who are delaying cases now, hoping that the Buhari administration will disappear, so that a different administration may look at the matter differently, right? So lawyers actually engage themselves in dilatory tactics to delay cases. In other parts of the world, you would lose your shirt. I'm sure that I can't remember the name of the gentleman, Mr. Ajibola, I'm sure Mr. Ajibola will know, if you delay a case here in any of the courts here, if you are deliberately playing dilatory games, you will lose your shirt, you will lose your license. You know, same as it is in the UK. You can't deliberately delay a case and then, you know, get away with it. So we need, you know, and again, this is one of the issues that we're dealing with at the MBA level, that because it's become almost a legitimate form of defense to just hold on, delay the case for as long as you can. So it's part of the problem that we're experiencing, and we hope that we'll be able to resolve them, especially by way of constitutional amendments. A gentleman asked about the Chibok girls who were released and about Leah Shaibu, I believe is the person you wanted to talk about, and what is happening about Leah Shaibu's case. I think, first of all, let us understand very quickly what happened with the Chibok girls. The Chibok girls, as you know, were abducted in 2014. Chibok is a Christian community. It's a largely Christian community. Almost all those girls were Christians. Almost all of the Chibok girls were Christians. In 2016, the first batch, we got the first batch back. For those who know, there are two factions of the Boko Haram, you know, and the girls are held by two different factions. They broke into two factions, and they're held by two different factions. The process of negotiation, of trying to get these girls back, is a very, very difficult one. We still have close to 100 still out who have not come back. They're all Christians. Most of them are Christians, by the way, because, as I said, Chibok is a Christian. So Leah Shaibu, being a Christian, isn't, I want us to see it in the general context also, that the girls who are still, who we've not been able to bring back, the Chibok girls who have not been able to bring back, are also Christian girls. Many of them are Christians. Of the 5 girls, of the 5 Dapchi girls who did not return home, 4 of them were killed. The one that survived is Leah Shaibu. So it's, you know, and we believe that we'll be able to get her back. The process of negotiating with terrorists is a very difficult one, as you can imagine. First of all, even the contacts, even making the contact, of course one can't go into the details, but even making the contacts is a very circuitous process. Just one single question. You go, I mean, we have quite a few countries that we negotiate through. We have quite a few, you know, interlocutors as well who we negotiate through. So it's a very long and tortuous process. It's not a straightforward process at all, but it's one in which we're engaged day by day, and we pray that we'll be able to return not just Leah Shaibu, but all of the remaining Chibok girls who are still held by the Boko Haram. Alfred, I believe, wanted to talk about the minimum wage. The truth is that we could do a lot better in terms of the minimum wage, but the minimum wage is just take the federal government, for example, is a reflection also of the resources that we have. Close to 70% of federal income is spent on recurrent, most of which is salaries. So really you are in a situation where most of what you earn is spent on keeping, you know, the civil service in place, which is the same across the states. There's a substantial amount of income that is spent already on salaries. So what we need to do is really to improve the overall economy so that people can be paid better. Just increasing salaries cannot do it. It simply cannot do it, because the salaries, what is available to government is finite. And all of what is available to government cannot pay the huge salaries that would meet the actual, the major demands of people. So I think that it's improving the overall economy is the way to go, which is what we're working on. You know, you can't just say, well, let's just, I mean, right now there's an agitation for moving up the minimum wage. But even when you move it up, you know, my view is that it really still will not address all of the concerns that we expect that it should address. But once we are able to improve the economy, especially giving better services generally, and being able to offer services that take away from people doing everything out of pocket, medical health, for example, out of pocket, when we could have insurance, and some of the things that take away the resources of people. Once we're able to provide those, I think the wage then becomes easier to deal with. Who arms the herdsmen? You know, again, it's a question like asking who arms armed robbers. The AK-47 is the most available assault weapon everywhere. The AK-47 costs probably about between 50 and 60,000 naira for a piece, right? Now, several of those who use the AK-47, and we have a problem with small arms generally. After Libya, after the collapse of Libya, the armories of Libya are open. The most available assault weapon in the entire world is the Russian AK-47, available everywhere. So it's everywhere. We have a major problem in Nigeria with the availability of AK-47 is what all the armed robbers use. Police also use AK-47. Everybody uses the AK-47. So it's not so much a question of who arms who. I think that anybody who had an evil desire is able to access a gun. But what we really need to do is to deal with the issues that underlie, you know, these kinds of violence, and to deal with those issues permanently. Because really, you're always going to have bandits, you're always going to have people who feel that because they are not, for some reason, finding justice within the system, they should help themselves. I think Mr. Jibola wanted to know about voting, Nigerians voting, diaspora Nigerians voting. And this is a point which I think is long overdue. I think there's every reason why Nigerians should be able to vote from the diaspora. But the major worry is that we need to really perfect our electoral system at home, you know, because even now we still have problems with the integrity of elections. There are huge disputes over the integrity of elections. And I believe that we should get that right, you know, because if you have diaspora voting where you have disputes over the integrity of local elections, it can really create problems because we have large numbers of Nigerians in diaspora. So you can imagine a situation where diaspora elections are rigged. I mean, that will really be a problem, you know. So for example, if we just suddenly found, after we have counted our votes at home, we suddenly found that from Minnesota, 500,000 votes are coming. we may really have a problem. But I think that the real issue, you know, is that there's absolutely no reason why we should not have diaspora voting. But I believe that there will be greater confidence once we're able to deal with the integrity issues around local voting. I think there will be greater confidence. Right now, it's not a discussion that will be easy to pass through, say, the National Assembly. I think there will be a lot of disputes over it. But again, it's an important point. Empower and JEEP and several of these other programs, I agree that these need to be sustained. The Empower is the program where we engage graduates, unemployed graduates. This is one of the largest programs of its kind. At the moment, we have engaged 500,000 graduates rather. And of the number, every local government has some. This is a larger number than the existing number of policemen or even the existing number in the army. So it's a very large workforce, and they are paid directly by the federal government. Now, to sustain that, because part of it's not meant to be a permanent program, it's meant to be a 2-year program. But at the moment, we see ourselves extending the program. We cannot see just ending the program. We have to find a way of ensuring that those who are in the program, because we're training as well, as I had explained earlier, each of them is expected to have a tablet where we put on a lot of training material, and we also have an open portal where they're able to go on and get material. The whole idea is to train them while they are being paid in the Empower program. And we think that it is sustainable so long as we're able to train them well enough for them to be able to exit and do stuff either for themselves or to be skilled up to be able to get employment in one way or the other. So we think that that's the way to sustain it, to ensure that we have a pipeline of graduates who are very well trained, who are adaptable. Some of them are in teaching, some in the healthcare system, some in farming. Some of them are extension farmers doing a lot of very important work in the various farms, farm projects all over the country. I think the last question is prosecution. I've already taken the question of prosecution and why prosecution is delayed. I think that's about it. Thank you very much.